Hello stitchy friends! Today I'm sharing how I finished off this piece that I stitched from Hands On Design. I'm starting out by measuring and my stitch piece is about 5 inches by 5 inches, so I want a little bit of a border. I've cut a piece of scrap paper here to be 5.5 by 5.5, so I'll have a 1/4 inch border on all the sides of my stitch. And this is the piece that I will be finishing it on, and I just did this so I could see that this looks really well and very well proportioned to my backer piece. So I'm going to trim this down to where I have about 1.5 inches on each side of my stitch. So I've trimmed this down a little bit here. You're going to see me go back there and trim a little bit more. I want enough to where I can wrap it around the back of a piece of board. Now, I'm pretty picky about getting things lined up, so what I like to do is draw some lines on the back of my stitch with a Fix-On pin, so that will go away with some heat if I need it to show exactly where the extents of my piece are going to be. So as I said before, I wanted a 1/4 inch on each side, and I'm just lining this up with my stitches to draw that 1/4 inch line and get the overall footprint of where the board and the batting will go for this piece. This way, when I lay them down on the back side, I don't have to keep flipping my piece over and trying to decide if things are nice and centered or not. And this is a pretty good method that's worked pretty well for me. So there are those guidelines, and I also need to cut a board. And I know that many people buy things already cut, but I am pretty comfortable cutting my own pieces of chipboard, or this is actually Bristol board that I got from Hobby Lobby. This is acid free, it's used for fine art projects, so it is perfect for this application. I just drew my lines for my 5.5 inch square. I have a metal ruler that I can cut against, and then of course I have my razor blade. And as I said before, I'm very comfortable cutting things like this. I went to design school, I made architectural models, so I did a lot of cutting like this, but it's really easy to do, and you don't have to worry about it being perfect because it's going to smooth out once we get our stitch on there. Now I have some batting that I'm just trimming down roughly to fit this square, and you could spray this with some spray adhesive. I tend to use what's on my desk, and I'm a paper crafter, so this time I'm going to pull out my tape runner and just put some tape runner on there just to hold this batting in place so it doesn't shift around. Now I'm going to trim this right to the edge of the board. If you wanted it to kind of wrap around and have puffy edges, you could wrap it around, but I'm just using my board, trimming it off with my rotary cutter. Now I can put this with the batting side facing down, and sometimes you could use some basting spray to hold this to your stitch as well, but I don't really feel that it's necessary. And again, I like using what's in my stash. So I have some double-sided tape that I use for paper crafting, just came from the craft store, and I'm putting 2 pieces at the top and the bottom. And this is how I like to wrap my stitch around a board like this. I have not tried lacing. I don't know if it's more difficult or not. I feel like with my personality, I might find it kind of frustrating, so this is the way I like to do it. So I've pulled the top around and tacked it down on that piece of double-sided tape, and now I'm doing the same with the bottom, and I'm pulling it pretty taut. You can see if it's straight because you can see it with the fabric, and now I'm just checking, and all that looks pretty good. But the thing I like about this double-sided tape is if you need some adjusting, it's easy to pull it up and kind of adjust it a little bit. So I kind of pulled that top a little bit tighter, and now I can roll the sides in, and I think this is looking pretty good. So let me flip it back over. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the sides, and I'll show you how I do the corners. I do not like to pull my corners in at a 45-degree angle. I like nice sharp corners. So I'm going to pull off the backing paper from that piece. I'm going to kind of pull the corner towards the inside, and I'm really sorry I went off screen there, and sort of finger press it down. So I'm kind of pulling it to where the fabric goes at a little bit of an angle and just finger pressing that piece. Then I'm going to fold this in, kind of like a present. And I know that these two sides, they're not touching that double-sided tape. That double-sided tape is only in the center. That's going to hold it in place for me for a minute. And I'm going to put a clothespin on this. I like to use clothespins because they're nice and fat and chunky, and they don't leave impressions on my stitch very much. And that's just to hold it in place just for the time being. And you can pull on it. You see I got a little bit of a bump there. But because none of this is really glued down, I can kind of adjust things a little bit. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And actually, I'm not too concerned about that bump right there because I'm going to put trim around this and it's going to hide any kind of imperfections that I have on my corners. But I'm doing the same thing on this side that I did on the other side. I'm going to fold it in, kind of tuck those corners in there a little bit. You can see I'm pulling it. It doesn't have to be perfect back here. No one's going to see this part. I just kind of want it pulled away from the edge a little bit, so that's why I pull the corner in a little. And since it's fabric and it's kind of stretchy, it works pretty well. And like I said, this is just to kind of hold these in place. I'm going to flip it over, take a look at it, make sure everything's nice and taut, and it looks good on the front. Because that's the part that really matters, what the front looks like. All right, now to make it a little more permanent, it's Turbo Tacky Glue. I like this better than the regular tacky glue because I think it sets up a little quicker. So I'm just putting a little bit of that tacky glue underneath the corner there where I do not have the double-sided tape. I'm going to smooth that down and hold it in place with my clothespin. And when you're doing this, my one tip is make sure that you don't get glue on your fingers. And if you do, make sure you don't touch the front of your stitch. You don't want glue on that beautiful thing that you spent all that time stitching. So I've done two corners on one side, and then I'm going to do the same on this side. Kind of pulling it down, pulling it taut. You can kind of smooth it out. You can see I have that little bump. I can still pull that on the double-sided tape because it's not permanent. None of this will be permanent until this glue completely dries. I'm adding a little bit more. Remember, this is 2 layers of fabric here, so sometimes you have to add a few more dabs of glue. And this one had some extra fabric kind of sticking out pretty far past my double-sided tape. You can see it's kind of loose there. So what I did on this one, which I don't always do, is I'm just putting that tacky glue all the way around, and I'm just going to smear it with my finger, and it kind of just seals in the edge to the back of the board. Honestly, I don't know that this really matters too much. I did end up adding another board on the back of it, which I'll talk about here in a little bit when I get to that point. And once this is glued to your final piece, none of this is going to come loose. This is just me kind of being very particular about the fabric on the back side to make sure it doesn't come loose. And then what I like about the clothespins is it holds it up off your surface while it dries, which is kind of nice. So while that's drying, I'm going to work on my trim, which I ended up dyeing. This is some cording or some rope that I just had in my stash. This is 100% cotton, so I can dye this, and I'm going to dye it with my Distress Ink Reinker. And I did test a little piece before I did this. So all I did was add warm water to this little bowl, add some drops of that Distress Reinker until I got it kind of the darkness I wanted. I let that rope soak in there. And then this is just an old t-shirt. I'm just pulling it out, place to sit it that kind of absorbs a little bit of that wetness. And then what I actually did was I hung it over my shower rod and let it dry overnight. Now this is where I'm adding another piece of board cut to 5.5 square on the back side. You do not have to do this. The reason why I did this is I wanted this whole piece to have a little more dimension off of that wooden background piece. And I'm just going to set a book on it and let that dry. So once that's dry, I can pull in my wooden piece. Now this is a piece from Hobby Lobby. There is the tag there if you want to see what it is. I like this because it can hang or it can set up, and since I'm sending this as a gift, I don't know how they want to display it. I like that option. Now I flipped my piece face down so I could see where to put my glue. Not that those gaps are really that big, but you saw I did a line at the top and the bottom, and then a squiggle where those big slats are covering it. Now before that glue starts to set, which it'll take it a little while, I'm taking my ruler and just making sure that it is nice and centered and straight. So it's a little over an inch on each side. And because, as you saw there, that glue's still wet, I kind of shifted it when I put my ruler there to get it all nice and even. And again, I'm going to set that book on top and let it dry. So once that's nice and dry and my trim has completely dried overnight, I am going to add this all the way around. And this is why I popped it up with another piece of board. I wanted that trim to kind of set below the top edge of my stitch instead of right up against it. So that was the whole reason why I added that second board. If you didn't care or you put rickrack around this, it wouldn't matter. So I started at the bottom in the center with the center of my rope, and I'm just working my way around, adding a little bit of hot glue as I go. I'll press that rope into that hot glue, and then as that hot glue cools, it will hold it in place. Now I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with the top. I was trying to figure it out. Do I want to cross it? Do I want to tie a knot? I left the ends kind of loose for a little while until I figured out what I wanted to do. So I'm just going to glue them towards the center. And then what I decided to do was add this ribbon that I found that is kind of like burlap, but not really. It's much stiffer, which was kind of nice because it held the bow really nicely. But I thought that that natural fiber of this ribbon went really well with this stitch. So you can see those tails are still there, and I actually considered keeping them, but I decided that I did not want that extra there, so I'm going to trim these off. And as you can see, they unravel. So this is why I left them long until I knew where I wanted them to be cut off at. So I'll cut them off. I'm going to tuck them together and add some hot glue all over this piece so that they do not unravel. And then I'm going to press this down because you can see it's a little bit fatter than everything else right now, but this is going to get covered up by that bow. So it's not really that big of a deal, but you don't want it like a big bulky piece in the middle. So once I've got that pressed down and in place, that's not going anywhere, that's not going to unravel. And you can see that my bow is going to cover up that connection right there. And I did at one point think about just doing a knot with two end pieces, but I like the look of the bow in the end. So I'll just add another little dab of that hot glue, and I'll clean up any excess with my pick tool there. That's what I was doing. And then I can trim off my ends to the length I need. So I left those ends really long. Now for my little embellishment, I have some pins from Just Another Button Company. This pack with the whale that I just pulled out is actually called Cape Cod, which is perfect because the person I am sending this to lives on Cape Cod. And then I have a seashell from the other pack. And I'm just going to stick these in the top through that rope and into the board. Now you have to be careful, you don't want to bend these, but if you very carefully stick them into that board back there, they will be held in place nicely. Now I need to finish this off with my name on the back so they know where this lovely gift came from. And I'm using one of my iron-on tags. This is handmade by Shari Moss, but obviously I can't iron this onto some wood. So what I'm going to do is take a little scrap piece of fabric here, and I am going to add some interfacing on the back. This little scrap is a little bigger than I need. Then I'm going to iron my little iron-on label to the piece of fabric just like I would do if I was making a fabric project. And now that that label is adhered to my little stabilized fabric piece, I'm just going to take my ruler and my rotary trimmer and trim it down so it's nice and straight and even on all four sides. And I have this little label with a fabric border. And you could do this with paper, but I just think that this kind of goes with the project better. Now to add this to that back piece of the wood, I'm just adding some more of that tacky glue all over. And I'm just going to smear that out a little bit with my finger because that was some pretty big blobs of glue and I don't want it squishing out. And then I will add this to the back of my piece right there below the hanger. And now it is all done. So here is my finished piece. I love how it turned out. I just know that the recipient is going to love it as well. And I really enjoyed being able to dye my trim to match my project perfectly. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial today and have an amazing crafty day. Bye!